Good morning and welcome to the December Planning Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Jonathan Vinehall, Chairman of the Planning Committee. This meeting is being held remotely and is being live streamed via YouTube, and the recording of it will be available afterwards on our website. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones on silent if they have one near them. Committee members only to leave their cameras on and mute their microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and also saves bandwidth and hopefully prevents loss of connection. I will first do a roll call to check all members who are expected to attend are present. So as I say your name, please turn your microphone on, confirm you're connected and progress. So firstly, Councillor Mary Barnes.
Present.
Councillor John Barnes, who's substituting for Councillor Johnson.
Present.
Councillor Sam Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Gary Curtis.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Errington.
Present.
Councillor Brian Drayson.
Present.
Councillor Tony Ganley.
Present.
Councillor Kathy Harmer.
Present.
Councillor Chris Madeley.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Mear. Councillor Andrew Mear. Come back to you in a minute. Councillor Howard Norton.
Present.
Councillor Susan Prochak.
Present.
Councillor Jeanette Stevens.
Present.
Councillor Hazel Tempe.
Present.
Do we actually have Councillor Andrew Mear with us today? Louise?
I can see that he's here, Chairman, but I can't hear him at the moment.
All right. Well, we can see him there. We'll see if he makes a connection. Councillor Andrew Mear, if you can speak, please do, or put something in the chat facility.
Councillor Mear speaking. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. The substitutes are Councillor Paul Cortell, Councillor Lynn Langlands, and Councillor Richard Thomas. I don't believe any of those are here today. Do we have Councillor Kevin Dixon with us today?
Present.
And do we have Councillor Carroll with us? No. The officers joining us today are Tim Hickling, who's the Head of Strategy and Planning, Sam Batchelor, who's the Development Manager, Jeff Pyra, who's the Team Leader and North Bexhill Manager, and Sarah Shepherd, the Development Management Team Leader. We also have, going backwards, Councillor Paul Cortell, who is with us today. Democratic Services Officer and Committee Clerk today is Louise Hollingsworth. Members of the committee will be making decisions by named vote. Because of this format, should a member lose connection, I will stop the meeting for a couple of minutes to enable the connection to be restored. If your connection cannot be restored within 2 minutes, the meeting will proceed and you will not be allowed to vote. Should you lose connection during an application, I would expect you to advise such when it comes to the vote. Those members who wish to speak, please indicate by typing your surname only in the chat facility. Speakers either for or against an application and parish and town and council representatives have the opportunity to register to speak at the meeting, and we have one speaker today. I will call speakers after the officer has presented the application, and there will be an opportunity for members to ask questions of the speaker. Members wishing to ask questions of the speaker should indicate this to me via the chat facility by typing their surname only. I'll call each member in order. Should this section be at all problematic, I may have to limit questions. If necessary, we'll take a break for a moment, should the meeting run for too long a period of time. And that takes us straight to the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is to ask you if you will authorise the minutes of the meeting of the 12th of November.
So moved. Authorised.
Agreed. Thank you very much. The second item is apologies for absence and substitutes. Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had an apology from Councillor Johnson, and Councillor John Barnes will be substituting.
Thank you very much. Item 3, do we have any additional items on the agenda, Mr. Batchelor or Mr. Hickling?
No additional items, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any withdrawn applications?
No.
Thank you very much. And do we have any disclosures of interest? Any disclosures?
Chairman, Councillor John Barnes. I'm the chairman of Etchingham Parish Council. I took no part in the discussion, which led to their representation on one of the items on the agenda.
And Mary Barnes, ditto.
Thank you very much. Are there any other town or parishes that are mentioned in that application that anyone wants to comment on? No. All right, good. Item 6 is the planning application list, which is there to be noted. We have Councillor Mear. Councillor Mear?
Chairman, I just wish to mention that 2 of my parishes, Guestling and Nicholsham, have commented on the traveller site application.
Ah, it's interesting. Well, I should probably note that Guestling is also within mine as well, but I haven't been aware of any discussions or been involved. Councillor Prochak.
Just that I think Salehurst and Robertsbridge have also commented, but I'm not on the parish council.
All right, thank you very much. And that takes us to.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to try and share my presentation. So hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
So this application is made in outline with all matters reserved, and it's an application for 2 Gypsy and Traveller pitches. So I'm going to start by showing you the detail map from the DASA. This is policy BEX3C, and it's one of 3 policy designations for North Bexhill housing development. So what this shows is you've got Watermill Lane, the grey S shape running down from Sidley. You've got in orange proposed allocated land for housing, light green for some amenity area. And then up here in this sort of khaki green, you've got a site allocated for a Gypsy and Traveller site. So what the policy says, it's an allocation for 150 dwellings and a small site of up to 5 pitches for permanent residential Gypsy and Traveller use. So you can see that site here. You can see this dog leg down to Watermill Lane is a potential access for that site. And that was discussed in quite some detail at the DASA examination back in May last year, which the council provided evidence to show that tracking was possible and that access for vehicles towing caravans could work to access the site from there, and that was accepted by the inspector, and that's in his report, and therefore the site was allocated. On this little plan, you can also see in the light green proposed landscape planting to the east of Preston Cottage, and some other planting in dark green next to this. This yellow line is a footpath, and in the white area there'll be further planting. All of that planting is mitigation planting required to offset the loss of habitat on NBAR, the North Bexhill Access Road, which is this dotted line, which, as you know, is now in operation with a roundabout here on Watermill Lane. And that has caused a change, as in Watermill Lane is now a no-through road and stops right where the site is. So that's the background. So if we move forward, this is the site application boundary in red. And as you can see, it's quite carefully defined. It's a small area of that wider Gypsy and Traveller allocation. So if you can sort of recognise the detail, there's Preston Cottage here. And so the allocation is effectively within the blue line leading up to on the northern boundary where NBAR runs. So that's the green area, and this is a smaller area within it. And if we move on, I'm sorry about the quality of this image. This is comes straight from the submission, so I'm not quite sure why it's a bit pixelated, but hopefully you can get a feel for it. You've got the access in from Watermill Lane here, and then they're showing how 2 pitches can fit within their red line, each pitch showing a static caravan, space for a tourer, for utility room, parking, and access road so they're showing that 2 pitches within this site, and they're showing how 5 pitches would fit on the site and therefore meet the allocation, which are the 3 dotted rectangles with access around the bottom. And what they're also showing is how the mitigation planting, which is required by NBAR, which Sea Change will be planting as part of that development within this planting season, so by the end of March, fits outside of their site, but within the allocation. So just to give you a bit of a reminder of what the site looks like, here I am, well, I'm not, here I am taking a photo down Watermill Lane. This is from outside the site looking back towards Sidley. This is looking the other way, so I'm just up to 180 degrees. I'm looking towards NBAR, which is on the slightly higher land to the top, and there's a turning area here at the cut-off end of Watermill Lane. Turning around a bit, you can see the access to the pedestrian cycle and equestrian crossing of NBAR. At the bottom on the right is the access to Preston Cottage. And there we are, between the two is where the access would be for this Gypsy and Traveller allocation, and as proposed to be the access for this site. I've walked up to the top of that dogleg to the main part of the site, and you're looking across the site with Preston Cottage and its hedging to the right. And now I'm on NBAR looking back towards Watermill Lane roundabout and across the site. So there's a bit of a raised area here, provides a bit of protection from the road, and an acoustic fence is going to be erected here, which is also part of the NBAR permission. So Sea Change will be erecting an acoustic fence here to provide protection in noise terms to Preston Cottage, and that of course will also provide acoustic protection for this site. So I'm just turning around on the site, so that's Preston Cottage. So you can see some planting already on the boundary, and the NBAR planting will put in about 5 to 10 metres of additional planting all the way across here. And if I turn again, you can see the remainder of the site. So relatively flat site just next to NBAR. So I'm not going to say a lot more than is said in the report. I think it's quite simple in a sense that there is an allocation here for a Gypsy and a Traveller site, and the applicant has been very careful to ensure that what they are showing works with that allocation and also responds to the needs of Gypsy and Travellers. And the Gypsy and Traveller liaison officer at the county has written, and that's on the report, confirming that the size of the pitches and what's shown would meet the expectations for two pitches. But there are a lot of comments on this. There's over 100 objections, mainly from local people in Sidley. Since I wrote the report, there's been one further objection, and that was that provided for you in an update. As you'll see, there are objections. Many relate to traffic and the impact on Watermill Lane. But as I've said in the report, what I'd say in response to that is that Watermill Lane was, of course, a through road to Catsfield. It's well used to accommodating traffic. It already accommodates farm traffic and traffic for equestrian use to the stables at the bottom of Watermill Lane, and is expected to accommodate traffic for the new housing developments. There's also concern from local residents. I think that the applicant here is from Netherfield, and much of the support is also from Netherfield. But I'll remind you that it's a basic principle of planning that anyone can make an application on land for a proposal, and what you're considering here is the proposal before you and not the applicant. So that's not a relevant consideration. There has been 3 further comments in support since I wrote the report, and they come from 3 parishes: Salehurst and Robertsbridge, Ashburnham with Penhurst and Crowhurst Parish Council have all written in support. So just to summarise, the advice is that the application is compliant with the DASA policy and that permission should be granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you. We have Councillor Dixon, who is just registering a personal interest. Did you want to just speak on that, Councillor Dixon?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not here for this application really, but as it's mentioned, I am the council appointed member and director of Sea Change, who own the land. But as I said, I'm not here to speak on this one. It's for the next one I'm here. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. And I believe we now have Bernard Brown, who is speaking for the applicant. Bernard, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but can't see you, sir.
All right.
Okay. I'll happily go blind, but can you hear me?
We can hear you. Do you have a camera to turn on or not?
It just won't switch on.
All right, and not to worry.
I'll just talk. Okay.
That's fine. Well, you have 5 minutes to speak, and as you've spoken before, so you know that, and you know the rules. And after that, if members wish to ask you a question, they will do through me. So if you'd like to speak about the application, Mr. Brown is speaking for the applicant.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. 1 year ago yesterday, the council unanimously adopted the DASA plan. Our application simply puts that plan into effect. As this impacts the whole district, the application has the written support of 10 parish councils. Sea Change Sussex acquired the land with public funds for mitigation of the NBAR. These mitigation works will provide privacy to Preston Cottage, which was granted planning consent by delegated power in July, in full cognizance of the planned use of this land as a traveller site. The site was subject to detailed scrutiny in the public examination of the DASA, and the council gave evidence that widespread public consultation was held without significant objections. The application confirms the policy of the council and enables it for the first time in years to meet its statutory obligations under PPTS, and gives a potential opportunity to genuine travellers to acquire a base of quality within instead of apart from the rest of our settled community. All councillors were aware of the considered alternate sites before agreeing the rationale of this site. Our application uses the council's own access plans approved by the planning inspector. The site suitability was promoted by the council, noting the minimal increase in demand on public services. The inspector agreed the site could be brought forward at any time. As applicants, we agree with all the conditions proposed by the case officer. Some objectors ignore the plans to build hundreds of homes in this immediate area on land now owned by Persimmon Homes. This is required to relieve pressure on other parts of Bexhill, such as Little Common. The proposed traveller site is but a tiny part of this development. Our detailed planning statement illustrates the past planning failures in terms of identifying and meeting Gypsy and Traveller 5-year need and supply under PPTS. The inclusion of this traveller site was essentially meeting the equality criteria. Although developed previously, these plans were guided through public examination, approval and adoption by the current administration. Intentional unauthorised development, predominantly in the Battle Parish, is the result of planning failures. In 2019, a site was deemed totally unsuitable for one mobile home, but after a 13-year period of temporary permission, this was extended to 4 units and granted permission because there was no suitable deliverable alternative. Approval of this application makes this site clearly deliverable. It should be noticed that the parish of Northam is almost certainly about to face similar challenges. Sadly, as Mr. Pyro said, many objections were based on racial and ethnic grounds, and surely such overt racism cannot be supported. But yes, this year the residents of Netherfield oppose an intentional unauthorised development. We oppose all development of the Netherfield property, supporting previous decisions. It was the applicant who introduced his traveller status to try and justify unauthorised development. This committee refused permission with the availability of the Bexhill site as a main factor. Unfortunately, information that the landowner, and remember this is part owned by the council, had stated they would not release its land, and this information was withheld from the committee in August by some officers and some elected cabinet members. Without this site being readily available, a successful appeal against this committee's decision is almost inevitable. This application is the consequence. Rowden have applied for outline consent for a traveller site on the one allocated site chosen by the democratically elected council. The statutory notice was served on the landowner. There has been no objection to the notice nor the application from them. Indeed, they have now said it is not our intention to prejudice the delivery of local plan allocations. And the council's CEO has advised the local MP in writing that a CPO could be considered necessary. Approval today establishes the clear validity and deliverability of this site. This empowers the Council to resist intentional unauthorised developments across the district, including Becks Hill. The case officer has said there are no planning reasons to refuse this outline planning application, but there are many excellent policy reasons to grant it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Very concise and well delivered and within time, so thank you for that. Do any members wish to ask questions of Mr. Brown? Councillor Ganley.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your presentation. Could you clarify what information was withheld and by whom?
Well, the chief officer or the executive assistant at the time of August had a copy of an email that we had from Sea Change Sussex saying that they wouldn't release the land for a traveller site. And that was not disclosed to this committee. Councillors Dixon, Field also had a copy of it, as did Mr. Hickling. They chose, for whatever reason, and I don't think it's a point of disputing that at the moment, they chose not to disclose it. And that's why we felt we had to do something else afterwards, and this application is a result of that.
Well, in that case, I would ask later on the officers and members why this information was withheld, but that is for a later question. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Ganley.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Brown? It appears not. So you've obviously been very concise in what you said, and I think everyone understands what you said. So you're welcome to stay in the meeting till the application is decided, at which time I'll ask you to leave the meeting, and you can continue watching other applications if you wish to on YouTube. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the courtesy of letting me speak. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the first person I'd like to ask to speak is Councillor Coleman, who is also the ward member. Councillor Coleman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I called this application to committee as it's locally sensitive and relates to previous decisions made by this committee. And there also are some issues raised in the comments on the planning portal about access and other things, which I thought were worth considering by this committee. Members should note that as a member of this committee, I've not yet reached a view as to avoid predetermination. But as Councillor Carroll is absent, I will do my best to put across the views of Siddeley residents. It is clear from this report that the majority of local respondents are against this application, and I think it's no surprise when you look at this from a local perspective. Here we see a site that's been earmarked as a traveller site, I think starting back in something like 2016 through various editions of the development and site allocation plan, that from conversation many residents had no idea about. For those who were aware in 2016, many didn't feel supported enough to object effectively, and I think, unfortunately, recent improvements to our consultation process are no remedy for this sort of lack of transparency in the past. So when a group of residents opposing traveller sites in Netherfield put in a planning application for this site miles from where they live, you can understand how some Siddeley residents might feel powerless, as their objections are dismissed because of a site allocation from nearly half a decade ago. I feel it is important to note that I'm absolutely appalled by the 166 racially motivated or inappropriate objections, and I'm glad to see them rightfully discounted from this report. I hope, however, that this does not deter members from considering the points raised by the 103 objectors and 3 supporters locally that were counted. As the report says, since the N-Bar development, this part of Watermill Lane has become a much-used amenity for dog walkers, joggers and horse riders and the like. It's a lovely little country walk for residents of Siddeley, and it provides great health benefits as a result. It's the view of many residents that whilst this use could just about be maintained after the approved nearby developments, the application before you might tip the scale and render the road unusable by non-vehicle users due to its lack of paving or safe spaces to step aside for traffic. In particular, the residents of Narrow Mayo Lane have raised concerns. They've already begun to experience problems with cars cutting through their road since the N-Bar development, and they fear they might see large caravans and towing vehicles getting stuck regularly as they attempt to use Mayo Lane as a cut-through. It is the nearest access onto Watermill Lane to the site. Moving the access to this site to Havenbrook Avenue would perhaps solve this and would give the site's future occupants easier access to and from the site without having to negotiate all of the residential developments on Watermill Lane. Now, 3 Sidley residents have expressed support for this application, suggesting that providing such a site is necessary, that it's only small, especially in comparison to the surrounding housing developments, and that this site shouldn't be treated any differently to a small housing development, for example, just because it's mobile accommodation. And these supporting comments should absolutely be considered, but I would hope that members give much less weight to the comments from those outside of the local area, individuals and parish councils who residents feel have little or no insight into an application in Sidley and seem to be motivated by issues extraneous to this particular application. As members of the planning committee, we have no choice but to make a decision based on the policies in front of us, policies which the report states are overwhelmingly in favour of this development, and indeed they are, or appear to be. But I would ask on residents' behalf that committee members examine the considerations expressed very carefully, especially in terms of access. And should members decide to approve this application, I ask that they look carefully at the conditions attached to approval and consider whether these should or could be strengthened. If this is to go ahead, members need to make sure it's a site that will work for the benefit of both local residents and any future occupiers. Members need to consider how this plan might work within the village of Sidley, as the applicants from Netherfield may not have this perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Coleman. Very detailed. Did I have any other members who wished to make a comment on this application? I don't see anyone coming out. No? No one at all? Councillor Project.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for your presentation. Just to say that we have in Robertsbridge, and has been here for 20 years, a permanent traveller site. There's a footpath behind the traveller site, and there is a lane in front of the traveller site. But actually, the screening, there's a lot of screening. And so I think the screening, as described by Mr. Pirate, is really important for lots of reasons. Both for the residents and for walkers and so forth. I just thought I would add that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Project. Councillor Errington.
Thank you. This just I just want to clarify something which I think I raised in our training session. The East Sussex Gypsy and Traveller Officer is satisfied with this. Does this site, is it available, or should it get approved? Would it be available to any Gypsy and Traveller family from anywhere over the country? And is it my understanding they actually have to buy the pitch? They don't rent it from the landowner. I appreciate that this isn't a planning consideration. It's just helping my own understanding of the whole issue. Thank you.
Sapphira?
Yes. So the land was acquired by Sea Change Sussex in tandem with the council to construct N-Bar under the threat of CPO, and Sea Change remain the owner of the land. And as Mr. Brown said, what they have said is that they will retain control of it until the mitigation is complete, but they don't intend to do anything to prevent the allocation being achieved. A Gypsy and Traveller or someone would need to buy the site. It could be a developer or more likely a Gypsy and Traveller family, and it would be a private site. So effectively, they would buy the site and they would develop it, put in the access, and it could be used by any Gypsy and Traveller family, and if this was granted under this permission. Yeah, but this is not a site like Robertsbridge that will be owned by the county, and available for people to rent the site. It would be a privately owned site like the other sites that we have in our district.
Thank you.
Councillor Gandy.
Thank you, Chairman. I think now is an appropriate time to ask the question of officers and Councillor Dixon. Why was the information referred to by Mr. Brown withheld?
Who would like to answer that question? Mr. Hickling, perhaps the most appropriate.
Good morning, committee. I think what we're talking about here was the legal privileged advice that we got from a barrister concerning the status of the Netherfield Hill situation, which obviously is separate to this application. So it's privileged information and under the advice that we were given by our lawyers.
I understand it was an email that was withheld.
Well, in which case, I'm not sure what email we're talking about. Sorry.
I don't know, Chairman, if you could ask Mr. Brown which email he's referring to.
Well, I can't really because he's finished speaking. I think that's something for outside the committee. If it's not part of the planning decision here. I don't think we can bring him back in under our rules. But if you would like to identify that email afterwards for yourself, and that discussion can be had. I'm not aware of this, so I don't think this is exactly the place to do that.
I think it's very relevant.
The question is to Mr. Hickling. So Mr. Hickling, is there an email? And if it is, what does it say, and why was it not relevant to the previous application?
Or why was it not disclosed?
Why was it not disclosable? Why was it not necessary to disclose it? We can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. All I would say is, without knowing the email and the circumstances, I can't answer that question at this moment in time. Sorry.
Well, Mr. Brown says that you had the email. You're not.
Sorry, I'm not disputing that. I just don't know the answer to the question at this moment in time without going through emails and the timelines at that time, which is an application not before committee this morning.
All right. Well, I don't think we can take that any further, Councillor Gowney. I'm sorry. As much as I'd like to hear the answer to that, Councillor Mary Barnes.
You could propose it since Tony has.
Sorry, Chairman, I think it probably is time, since no one is saying anything, to propose that we give this planning permission. I can't see any other way around it. It's in the data. We've heard a really good explanation from both officers and from the speaker. It just seems to me that this is completely and utterly watertight. It is quite obvious why there were so many Netherfield people writing in, Councillor Coleman. The only other thing I would just like to have reassurance on is that the condition that says there should be no there should be no business use. There's also one on the number of vehicles on the site. I want to make absolutely certain that this site is kept absolutely pristine for the benefit of those people who live in the vicinity. And I wonder if there's any other condition that we can make that actually says that this site should not have the normal detritus that one is associating with traveller sites.
Mr. Pyra, can you comment on the conditions that might deal with that?
Well, I think these conditions are consistent with conditions on other gypsy and traveller sites. I don't think you can make any judgment that's any. I'm not sure what else you can say.
I suspect that the answer is that if there is an issue with any site, and not talking just about this site, then that becomes an enforcement issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, if it was considered that the site was that untidy, section 215 could be served to deal with that issue. You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you know, Councillor Barnes, you can't deal with this in any other way than you would deal with a normal application. And in a normal application, you wouldn't have a condition saying this has got to be kept tidy, because that would, you start to put conditions on that would not be normal, if you like, I think is the answer. And so,
thank you, Chairman. I'm perfectly happy to go if to accept Sam's reassurance on that, and I'll just go with the fact that I would like to propose that we give this that we grant planning permission.
All right. Well, we have a
Councillor.
Yeah.
I second, Chairman.
You would like to second it. I did actually have another two speakers. I think I had two notes for Councillor Barnes. Was that John Barnes, or did you just happen to put your name in twice?
No, I just wanted to say a word about why I think a number of parish councils and other people are interested in this, because I think the people of Sidley need to understand that this is part of our policy for handling traveller sites across the district. What we have out in the AONB is a number of unauthorised sites that have from time to time been tolerated for personal reasons, but very often they're visually intrusive on the AONB, quite remote from facilities. And one of the reasons why they're tolerated is because we've not actually got the designated sites up and running. And that explains why this is something of a Rother issue rather than simply a Sidley issue. Whether or not this was the right site for travellers is obviously something that was examined in detail at the time of the DASA examination. And it is unfortunate, I think, that many Sidley people didn't recognise that it was in the local plan, or seem not to have been aware that the examiner did actually spend quite a lot of time at the examination of the DASA exploring our reasons and our justification for this particular site. I have to say that his conclusion was entirely on the side of the DASA, that this was an appropriate site, that it had got adequate access. I think it is quite an important condition that we're attaching, that it should not be used commercially, because we do know in the past that some traveller sites have been used commercially and can generate rather heavier traffic than might otherwise be the case. Here we are dealing with a relatively small number of caravans. They won't travel all the year, and there won't be a great deal of traffic generated. I fear for the people of Sidley it is the housing development rather than this small development which is going to restore traffic to Watermill Lane. And I fear it won't remain a quiet lane for walkers and dogs. But that is a necessary consequence of the housing permission that has already been given. I don't think actually this particular permission will generate the kind of traffic they fear. Therefore, I support the giving of planning permission.
All right, thank you. Well, we have a mover and a seconder, but we have one more person to speak, Councillor Project, and then we'll take a vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I was going to second it, but I also wanted to comment on the issue because I object very, very strongly that a member of the public can come onto the planning committee and publicly challenge the integrity of both officers and members. And it's about an issue that's actually nothing to do with this particular application, as I understand it. So I just wanted to say that. I know you've said, well, we're not going to discuss that now, but I want to object most strongly to that. And I support the application, and I think a lot of Councillor Coleman's concerns, and they are founded in some respects, maybe we can address those more at the detailed application stage.
All right, thank you very much. So, Louise, could I hand it to you to take a vote, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Okay, members, I'll call your names out alphabetically. Please respond with for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Curtis.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Maidley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous and carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I think Mr. Brown has left the meeting, so thank you to him as well. On that basis, we'll move to the next application, which is 2019-604P Battle Blackfriars. And who is going to present this?
That's me, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Just to make you aware, Sarah Shepherd is in the meeting, just in case anything comes up with questions from members.
Thank you.
So there is a PowerPoint presentation to this, but if you don't mind, I won't share it. It's just a title screen. There's no information to share with you. So is that okay if I just carry on and speak to you? Members will note from their committee agendas that this is the application relating to the large Blackfriars development in Battle that was approved, I think, earlier or at the end of last year. Yeah, at the end of last year. And it's been brought back to Planning Committee, not because there's been any amendments to the planning application or that the scheme has changed anyway. However, during the negotiation in relation to the Section 106, the County Council have updated us as the local planning authority that there were comments in relation to the wider impacts of the development on surrounding highway infrastructure that hadn't been addressed fully in their comments, and so that they were providing those to us, and we considered it then pertinent to bring it back to Planning Committee to make you aware of those additional comments, not only because they include additional information from the Highway Authority, but also because they make some alterations to the recommendation in terms of the Section 106 requirements and also a couple of the conditions. Now, the report might seem a bit much on the face of it, just because it includes the detailed comments from the county, but if you focus on the sections at Section 2 of the report, that essentially sets out a summary of what it is that the Highway Authority are asking for. And in paragraph 2.2 in particular, it sets out that they mention a number of contributions and also a number of specific highway works that are required to be undertaken in association with the development. Those things relate to bus services, bus stops, travel plans, public right-of-way improvements, that kind of thing. They're all typical of a development, and so yes, I agree that you might think it's quite odd that they weren't fully disclosed previously, but they have been now, and again, that's why it's being brought before you. And then just further on in the report, it explains that, like I said, the recommendation slightly tweaked, and specifically conditions 11, 19, which is now number 20, have been reworded to account for those comments from county. There are also new conditions listed at number 18, 21 and 31, and we've also added some additional informatives at numbers 4 and 5. Again, all really to cover off what it is the county are now adding to in terms of their comments. Still no objection from the county, still recommended for approval. As we understand it, the Section 106 is in a position to be signed by the county, so all 106 matters have now been agreed by them with the applicant. And so hopefully following approval here today, we will be actually in a position to issue the outline planning permission such that a reserve matters for this site can now be pursued. So recommendation for approval subject to the completion of the 106 with those changes to conditions. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Sam. Councillor Dixon, did you want to speak?
Yes, please, I'd love to.
Good.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me speak. As you know, this is solely in my ward in Battle. The highways authorities' comments are generally extremely welcome, and it's something that as local councillors, both myself, councillors Field and Cook, have been pushing for a lot more on the link to the station from the site. I bang on about this every time we speak about Blackfriars. It's nice that the county have also included that now as part of this report. And I hope that we will take that fully on board, even though there doesn't seem to be any more conditions that are recommended in relation to that. The bus costs are interesting. The comments I'd like to make, particularly about the real-time passenger information for the 4 bus stops. £50,000 is an awful lot of money to provide that. When you're talking about a bus service which is only every 2 hours, I don't think there's going to be an awful lot of information shown on a real-time passenger information screen for that. We don't have real-time passenger information anywhere else in Battle, and I would hesitate to say anywhere else in the rural areas either. So why that is required here, I don't know. It seems an awful lot of money for what it's going to produce. The contribution towards a pedestrian crossing in Battle Hill is excellent and is really, really needed. It's a campaign that we've had going in Battle for a long time. We've already had fatalities at this area, and so obviously another 220 houses will only contribute to more pedestrians going towards the Tesco filling station. I'd urge that the committee take on board all of these, and hopefully this will improve the connectivity of this site with the town. I do have a couple of questions about the public right of way. Some of that is in private ownership, owned by residents in Kingsdale Close, and some of the access is very small. Will this cause a problem? Upgrading it and actually making it easier to use, but when there is a particular bottleneck coming into Kingsdale Close, and that passes over private land. Thank you.
Sam, did you want to respond to those couple of questions about the real-time passenger information, particularly?
Yeah, I'll.
Are we asking,
okay, I'll start with that. I'll start with that one because
something that doesn't actually exist.
Well, firstly, we consult the county council on a planning application, and it's for them to come forward with their suggestions. We will interrogate those to a certain degree, and yes, put pressure on the county to justify those where, from an officer's point of view, we've got concerns about those. But with regard to real-time travel information, I don't think there's any particular officer concern with providing that, although I understand what Councillor Dixon just said in terms of actual need for it. And if there is an issue about need, and especially the cost, because that was another thing that Councillor Dixon mentioned, that does seem like quite a substantial cost. It's really for the applicant to make issue of that. And as it stands, like I mentioned in the summary, my understanding is that the applicant is in an agreed position now with the county. So if so happens that in the future it comes forward that is an amount that they don't agree with, then obviously it would have to go through the usual process of amending the 106. But as it stands, that's where that's at, really.
All right, thank you. And Councillor Barnes.
Chairman, I ought first to mention that although I'm not the county councillor for this area, I am an East Sussex County councillor. Obviously, I've taken no part in any discussions about this, so my interest is purely personal. I'm grateful actually to county for providing us with one of the most detailed analyses that I have ever seen, and I wish we had some of this on some of our other applications, because I think it's extraordinarily helpful. I have to say I share some of Councillor Dixon's doubts about the real-time passenger information. It seems to me that we're being asked for a sum which is probably more than is needed simply for treating one bus stop. So I have to say I think the applicant and indeed ourselves should take an interest in that, because it worries me if we are moving this site towards viability problems, because at that stage, again, we're going to have to address the conditions unnecessarily at length because we didn't get a proper assessment of viability at this stage. The 60,000, I think, is a very different matter because that's a contribution towards Battletown transport, bringing a route onto this estate. And it seems to me that that is a highly desirable way of minimising the use of cars. And most of the rest of this is about improving pedestrian and cycling access, and in particular, improving the access from this estate to the station. All of that seems to me highly desirable from a green point of view, and we are trying to make this one of the most eco-friendly developments in the whole of Rother. So it seems to me we should be supporting these Section 106 matters, with the possible exception of the contribution to the real-time information. But I would hope that somebody has addressed viability in a sensible way, because what we really don't want to do is to have these conditions imposed and then somebody come back and say, no, they can't be imposed because of the viability of the site. We would then be behaving just like any other developer, and I think that would be not a very good thing to do. Thank you, Chairman.
If I could just, before I ask Councillor Mears to speak, just sort of a subtle reminder that this is an application by Rother District Council is the applicant here, and we are the planning authority. So it is not that I think the questions on viability are good questions, in that we don't want things bouncing back when we can see that they're going down a bad viability route, you know, if because we've seen that in the past. But just if I could ask members just to be a little careful in terms of actually challenging these are as much about what the applicant has already agreed, and I don't see any objection by the applicant to any of these conditions. So just if everyone could just be a little careful of that. Councillor Mears.
Chairman, to a considerable degree, I think others have covered the point that I was going to make, and I will be careful as you suggest. But I did have reservations about the value for money of the real-time information on the bus stops. That's an awful lot of money front-loaded onto the development for something which these days has been overtaken by more modern technology, namely apps on modern phones, whereby you can get information in real time wherever you are, whether you're at the bus stop or not. And I rest my point there.
All right. Thank you. Before I'll just ask Sam Batchelor to speak. I think he wanted to interject with a comment. You might have something that's pertinent.
Well,
I'm sure you have something pertinent.
Thank you, Chairman.
Being made now.
Well, it was only just actually initially just to come back and say that I didn't actually answer Councillor Dixon's direct question, which was about the upgrades to the public rights of way, and that's just to say that will be a discussion with the footpath officer about how that can come forward, taking into account things like ownership. So it's agreed within the 106 to get it upgraded, contributions towards that. But yeah, if there are issues around land ownership, then obviously that will influence how that will come forward. The real-time passenger information. I mean, sorry, I could have been a little bit clearer beforehand. Yeah, it is an East Sussex County Council requirement. We don't necessarily interrogate those very fully, but they do ask it in accordance with their own objectives and aspirations. And moving forward with climate change mitigation, non-car modes of transport, it's just part of their wider plan to improve infrastructure. Whether or not you agree with that, obviously, I accept, and is something that you'd like to take into account. But like I mentioned, something that apparently the applicant has signed up to for the time being.
Thank you. Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I fully agree with Councillor Dixon about the contribution of £50,000 for real-time passenger information. Mr. Batchelor tells us that it was up to the applicant to object to this. Well, we are the applicant, and I'm objecting to it. And I therefore propose that contribution number 2 under paragraph 2.2 be withdrawn from the recommendation?
I have to stop you there. You're not the applicant. You're the planning authority. You're the committee of the planning authority. The applicant is Rother District Council, and you have to draw a very careful line between the two in such applications. Sam, would you like to just advise on that matter, or Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, that is the distinction you need to make. You need to be careful. You're doing this independent of the council as a corporate entity. You are the local planning authority or representatives of. If it was you took the view that that wasn't necessary, then yes, it's definitely within your gift to remove that specifically. The county have included it because they believe there is a justification for it. I don't think it's the be all and end all of the scheme, so I don't think it would be necessarily be a problem. However, short term there will be an issue because, like I said, I think they're in a position to enter into the legal agreement today. So
I think if you had a valid concern that this is going to affect the viability of the application, and we don't want to see viability assessments coming back, and I think you've got a point there. But the applicant should be looking at this, and if anything, we should be advising the applicant, please don't come back with a viability assessment, if you haven't checked these things out. So, as I'm sure we will do with others that are coming forward. I had Councillor Project, but I would not normally, but Councillor Dixon forgot to ask a question, and I think it's only fair that we let him ask that question. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you. I didn't forget. I was not putting all my eggs in one basket.
I was being kind. You're not meant to be speaking now.
1.3 rail access. It explains there that the county want to investigate more in a reserved matters application about the direct link from the site into the railway station. Could Sam please explain how that's going to work? Whether that affects this application or whether we're going to deal with that at the next application. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dixon. Sorry, I did make a note of that one as well, so I could have answered that earlier. So when members granted this previously, there was a condition number 19, which is now number 20, which was about the future investigation of a link, and taking into account the comments from Highways, that's retained. So as part of the reserve matters submission, the applicant is to investigate that fully, with the intention of providing it unless there is some reason why it cannot be, and that will be assessed at that application stage.
Okay. Councillor Project.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, the point I wanted to make, I think probably does link in, but I will take advice in terms of access, rail access, bus services, footpaths, links, that kind of thing. Because as I understand it, we are about to sign in to the WHO age-friendly communities. And one of those things will be access and accessibility and ability to move around. So I just wanted to flag that up at the age-friendly communities. But also the other thing, and I know it's not part of this application, is that we're learning more and more about biodiversity. And that, in fact, the NPPF does require us to ask applicants to provide a biodiversity plan. And I know a lot of work has been done on that. But I think we should really focus on this biodiversity net gain, which is coming along in the Environment Bill next year. And we've learned a lot about how things can be mitigated by all sorts of quite cheap things like, cutting verges and swift boxes built into each house, and hedgehog trails and gaps in fences. So you smile, Councillor Barnes, but it's really important. Our biodiversity is depleted hugely. So I just wanted to put the marker down for those two things, the age-friendly communities and biodiversity net gain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think
I support biodiversity, Chairman.
I know you do, Councillor Barnes, and I think you were at the presentation yesterday on the wildflower. So I think Councillor Project, I think he was agreeing with you with a positive smile. So thank you for that. I don't have any other questions or comments. Did anyone want to make any other comments or propose the recommendation or otherwise? We have a question from Councillor Errington. Councillor Errington.
Yeah, sorry, I think I've just missed a bit on, I unfortunately missed the presentation on Blackfriars. I think that's either last month or earlier this month. We're talking about condition 1920. Is this relating to the fact that there is no disabled or wheeled access over the railway line in Battle? Is that included in any way? My apologies if it isn't relevant to this, and I will take it up with the officer outside the meeting. So it's when you can't actually, if there's only the steps over the railway line. Can anything be done about that in part of this project? And does that what 19 and 20 condition relates to? Sorry, waffled on.
Not specifically, no, Councillor Errington. We have no control over railway land. So this is more about what we can achieve in terms of appropriate pedestrian and cycle links. So condition 20 is about doing an audit of what is potentially required, what can be achieved, and then coming to an agreement with the County Council and the developer about providing those. But it's meant to be part of the reserve matters. That's what that condition is securing. So if and when the reserve matters comes forward and it's brought before committee again, and there are issues around it, that is, something that the committee members will be able to discuss and take into account.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I have a proposal from John Barnes to, I presume you're proposing the recommendation, is that correct?
Correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Do I have somebody to second that?
Yeah, Councillor Tempe would like to second. Thank you.
We have a second from Councillor Tempe and also at the same time from Councillor Project, at which time I will hand it over to Louise to take a vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I'll call your names out alphabetically. Please respond with for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Curtis.
For.
Councillor Errington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mia.
For.
Councillor Norton.
For.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Tempe.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's unanimous and carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that moves us on to item 9, which is the undetermined major planning applications. This is a report that we've been receiving for some time now, and we had asked that the report give a little bit more detail on exactly why an application is not moving forward, and the officers have done a good job of providing more detail, and I thank you very much, Sam, particularly because I know you've worked on this. Any questions? It's a pretty detailed report. It shows, unfortunately, it shows a lot of developments not moving forward for all sorts of reasons. Often applicants just not responding. Were there any questions for this on the report? In which case, Louise, do we need to take a vote? This is just a report to be noted.
As it's a report for noting, there's no need, Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Did you want to speak, Councillor Ganley? No?
Well, no, thank you.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you.
All right, that's good. In which case, we'll move on to item 10, which is the planning statistics for the quarter July to September. And these continue to have the very good trend bar charts to show exactly what's happening over a period of time. Sam or Tim, did you want to take us through any highlights of these? Anything you wanted to make specific on?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Unless Sam wants to do this, I'm happy to take this. So this is a useful report, and essentially it's a report that sets out the development management performance and workload, and it's set out in two sections. So the first section is essentially the performance during what we call Q2, and that's the period between the 1st of July to the 30th of September of this year. So on this particular section, I'll just draw your attention to a couple of interesting elements. The first is the government returns data, which are called the PS1s and PS2 returns. Now, this is data that's sent to MHCLG, and it's effectively data which we are then benchmarked against other authorities. And there are three simple performance indicators which have been reported over a number of years to central government, and they're basically on speed of decision on three elements. Major schemes, which are schemes, residential schemes of 10 units and above, or industrial floor space over 1,000 square meters. Minor schemes, which is anything below that. And the third element is what they call others, which essentially includes domestic extensions, domestic kind of applications. So that particular set of data is important because, as I said, that's sent to central government. So in the first part of the report, other areas of reporting are the total number of applications in the system, the number of appeals we've dealt with during that quarter, the number of enforcement complaints, and land charges. I'm moving on because the second half of this report's interesting, because that data is then benchmarked against 5 previous quarters, previous performance over the whole of the period in 1920 and obviously the first quarter of this financial year. So again, going back to the PS1 and PS2 returns, they are benchmarked on tables 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, and they're on pages 41 and 42. So is it a good point just to pause there and let members digest that information if they've got any questions? Well, that's, as I said, that's the information. Sorry, go on.
Councillor, yeah, go on. John Barnes.
Sorry, my question relates to later in the report. Can I defer it until I've heard Tim on that?
Okay, that's fine. So moving on, the tables, other tables I'd like to draw your attention to is tables 2.0, which is on page 41, which is essentially talks about the number of applications determined, but essentially you add that to table 4.2 and you read these together, and that is the total number of decisions that we have determined over those 5 quarters. So taking the last quarter, on table 2.0 on page 41, we've done 252 decisions on what we call the PS1 and PS2 returns, which goes to government. And then table 4.2 on page 43 is all the other applications that we've determined, because there's not just those 3 elements. There's a whole raft of other applications, prior notification applications, discharge of condition applications, and you add the 2 together, and in the last quarter, Q2, we did 360 decisions between the 1st of July and the 30th of September. Now, bearing that in mind, I refer you now to table 5.1, which is on page 44. And that shows you the number of applications we have on hand. So if you look, so basically the number of applications we determined is around about 360, but the number of applications we have currently on hand is almost 600. So there's a huge gap there in terms of the decisions we're making and the actual workload we have in the system. So that's quite an important point, I think, for capacity issues. So moving on to look at enforcement complaints, and if I just bring you on to page 45, table 8.1. 8.1 is really telling. And I think I mentioned this at the committee in September. There was already a trend building up of increasing enforcement complaints. So the last quarter, as you can see on table 8.1, is a massive increase, huge increase on the number of complaints the enforcement team are dealing with, almost 3 times the normal. Now, I alluded back in September that there may be reasons for that, and I think lockdown has got to be a factor, whichever way that is, people being at home longer, people doing things that maybe they shouldn't do because they're at home or whatever. But that statistic is huge, and that has a knock-on effect, probably with some of your relationships with the enforcement guys. When you're chasing up on complaints, they're awash with work. So I just thought I'd flag that. It was quite an important stat. So moving on table 8.3, it then goes on, a bit like the planning applications, about the number of complaints that are in the system. As I mentioned, with the planning applications, we've got 595. In the enforcement world, they've got 456, I think it is. Yep. Now, our service plan has a target of having 200 active complaints in the system. So you can see there that the enforcement team have got over double that in terms of active complaints. So that's very telling. And I think the last table, which is a new table we've inserted, it's about land charges. It's about the number of land charge searches we get. And these essentially, as you probably well know, are searches that are done before house sales take place. So again, a huge increase on the last quarter. And I think that's largely down because the government have relaxed stamp duty on house sales. So there's been a real bounce on quarter one. There was obviously half of the previous quarter 4, and that was probably down to lockdown. But now there's been a real bounce in the amount of work in land charges, and that's in our PPS team. So again, huge increase in workload in that area. So that's kind of a summary of where we're at. I'm happy to take questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think we've got John Barnes first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was aware of the capacity problem in terms of planning applications. Indeed, I think we all are, and to have some sympathy for the officers concerned. I wonder, actually, in terms of queries, I hope our IT experts are looking at whether AI could handle some of these queries to try and save on person power, I suppose is the appropriate term. The one that really worries me, I'm bound to say, is around planning enforcement, because without good enforcement, the planning system comes into disrespect. It's a guess, but perhaps part of the rising number of complaints is people have been out walking around more, taking more physical exercise, and are probably more aware of breaches than they would have been in the past. But that's a hypothesis, which I doubt if anybody will be able to substantiate. But it is troubling, the number of complaints in the system. And we are beginning to get a reputation for not actually being a very good enforcement authority. It's a capacity problem. I'm not blaming anybody for this, but it is beginning to do us reputational damage.
Thank you. Did you want to respond, or is that just a comment, John?
Happy if Tim wants to comment. Mine was a comment, not a question, but I think it is a capacity problem which we need to address on the enforcement side. I mean, to have double the number of unsettled complaints that is our target seems to me not a system that we can perpetuate.
I think from an officer perspective, Councillor Barnes, I think we'd agree with you. I think our reputation could be at risk because of the sheer workload of the officers are trying to deal with. So, yeah, I think we concur with that.
I think it's worth noting for those who are unaware that a review of our planning processes has just started with the intention of figuring out how to relieve officers of a lot, basically make our processes better in whatever way it can be done, because clearly we are deciding on something like 50 less applications a month than we're receiving, and this trend has been building up for some long period of time, and a spike in complaints doesn't help. It's good to see that appeals lodged has actually trended down slightly, although the number's not large, but application on hand has consistently gone up, and that's because we're losing 50 or 60 a month in terms of what we can decide on. So that is the reason there is a full review of the processes and to see what can be done in what other ways, including what you just suggested. So hopefully that will start to resolve the problem. Councillor Errington.
Hi, thank you. It was a question on 9.1, the local land charge searches. We touched on this briefly before the meeting. Can you just confirm that are there two levels of land charge, a sort of basic and a more in-depth level? This relates back to whether people are aware, A, of planning that's going on locally, and B, the DASA. Would that come within the search?
Yeah, you can, when you submit a search, you can ask questions under what they call a Con 29, where the solicitor can ask questions that are beyond the normal basic search, which can ask, for example, what's the local plan status in the area? Is there any allocations that affect a given area around the site? But that's obviously for local solicitors to pick up on.
Okay. Second part of the question is, are the fees that we charge the solicitors, are they set nationally?
No, the land charges service is a bit like builder control. The income we get in has to pay for the service, and we're not supposed to make any profit. Yeah.
Okay. As just obviously with 1,000 coming in, that's either that's as you say, it was the stamp duty thing. There's obviously an income stream, but we can't. There's no way of that answers my question. Thank you.
I think it's been upturned to 1,093, and the stamp duty thing has probably you've got people going again. But actually, if you take the average over the 2 quarters, it's 730. So the average over the 2 quarters is pretty much in line with the 4th quarter of last year. So I think it's things not happening and then everyone running it to make it happen, motivated by the stamp duty. It just doesn't help in terms of resource allocation. Councillor Harmer.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Errington has spoken of our questions. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, you're happy, yeah? Good. Was there any other questions on this report? Self-explanatory.
I think I typed my name in, Chairman, did I?
Did you? I can't see it anywhere.
Oh, well, sorry, I intended to.
That's all right. Please go ahead, Councillor Ganley. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It is worrying, the backlog of planning applications and enforcement issues. I suppose the answer is to recruit more staff, but as we all know, there's a shortage of planning officers across the country. And we have tried to recruit more staff. I don't know how that process is going at the moment. However, with regard to enforcement officers, there are presently 3 officers. Would it be possible to recruit another 1 or 2? I believe that often such officers are ex-police officers. Perhaps our chairman could lend a hand.
Well, I don't know, Sam or Tim, who'd like to give an update on planning officer recruitment, because there has been some success and some changes and some things going forward.
Yeah, we've just recently done interviews for a couple of posts where we've been successful, which one of them's team leader, which is essentially Sam's old role, and another planning officer. There are plans afoot to look at obviously this issue, and Councillor Vinehall's touched on the peer review. We're obviously in discussions with our chief executive as well in terms of trying to clear the backlog. We're early stages of trying to resolve that. But as you said, Councillor Ganley, one of the biggest problems is recruitment of officers. It's a national issue. There is a shortage of planning officers, unfortunately. But here at Rother, we have invested in sending officers on postgraduate courses at Brighton, and we've got a number of officers now. I think it's 5, one of which is doing their dissertation. So we do invest in staff, very much so, essentially because of that problem. So, but it is a work in progress. We are looking at this very closely as we speak.
Thank you. And Councillor Drayton.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Ganley for trying to fill in what spare time I do have available. But can also mention items 9 and this item. I welcome the extra information that we're getting, and I also know that there is a plan afoot in January to improve the information that we get on enforcement and what's actually happened with enforcement, which again is welcome, because I know at the moment if we take enforcement action, technically that's no further action, and that's all we get told, so we don't get to see the work that our enforcement officers are actually doing. So I welcome that in the new year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Tempe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, everything was pretty much covered that I was going to comment on, but one question I do have for Tim, the PS1 and PS2 returns you have to send in, do you get any feedback on that number, or is it just purely box ticking exercise the government requires?
Well, we submit our data as 350 other authorities do, whatever the figure is, and those tables are published. I think it's annual, or although it's probably quarter actually, but it's not in a league table of the top 5 performing necessarily. It's by county area, right. So you can look on their website and look at our performance. But it's out there. It's publicly available information, and that's how the government assesses our performance. And if our performance on determining applications falls but to a certain point, there is a risk, and we're not in that. A risk of becoming a standards authority, which means the ultimate stick is that the government take over your planning service. But we're not in that ballpark.
Yeah. At what point is that? That's what I'm curious about.
I think it's. I think unless Sam can tell me otherwise, I think it's to do with major applications, and I think it's one of the criteria actually relates to appeals as well, to do with appeals on major schemes, but also in determining speeds on major applications, and that threshold is quite low.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and also thank you very much for this information. It's really, really useful. Thank you.
If you'll remember, a few months ago there was a report to committee which showed this information compared to the other southeast authorities. So you get a comparison at least to those in our local geography. So that information does get fed back in that way at some point in time. It would be useful to know. I'm not sure if Sam can give us a figure. I should know because I did know at what level it does actually trigger a problem. Sam, do you know that figure for both appeals and?
I was hoping that you and Tim were both going to bypass me on this.
Well, I didn't know the information, but it's your job to.
Well, I can't remember the planning application one offhand. I'm sorry, it's on a poster in my wall, and so I'm going to blame coronavirus because I haven't got it to hand. The appeals one is it's 10% of appeals that are determined against us is the threshold by which the government become interested. But we're nowhere near that. I haven't done the statistics, but I suspect it's 0.0 something that we're in the region of. the planning applications in the past used to be something like if you fell below, well, firstly, actually, they're interested in majors. It's your performance on major applications that they're interested in, and so it's when your performance dips above a decent level for that, which I think is 60%, and you have to have done that continuously as well for I think a number of quarters, and then that's when they kind of start chasing you.
All right, that's thank you for that. Were there any other questions? If there are not, then I think we'll note that report. Sorry, Councillor Prochak.
Just to say, it's a good thing that we're actually getting more staff in to clear the backlog, because if we look at major applications, 67%.
Somebody's got Big Ben in the background there.
I recognise that clock. I'm just commenting. It's 67% major applications.
Yeah, it's tough. It's not great. Actually, I don't think Tim. Did you actually just cover off exactly how many people you've got starting or plan to start in either a contract capacity or a full-time capacity?
Well, the contract side of things hasn't been sorted out yet. It's an ongoing. We put an improvement plan forward. In terms of vacancies, we've got, as I said before, we've finally managed to recruit Sam's replacement in his own old role as a team leader, and I believe she starts in February time. We've got a planning officer who is, well, essentially it's an internal move, so that's pretty much ongoing. And was there a third one? I'm trying. Sam, can you help me on this?
Sorry, Tim, was this recruitment?
Yeah.
We're reviewing a third post based on the opportunities now that we've managed to shift someone internally. Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, moving forward, hopefully we're going to get some temporary solutions in as well to help.
Good. We'll look forward to see how that works out. Councillor Harmer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, really. The government announcement yesterday regarding housing targets and the consideration of the South. Tim, could you tell me how and when that would affect us, please?
Okay. That was just announced yesterday, so I don't know at this moment in time, but I believe they've scrapped the target figures in the white paper that, if you recall, we had. It was suggested that we were going to have to provide 1,148 units per annum, and I think from what I've heard, which may be as much as you've heard as well, is that they've scrapped those figures for ourselves, and I think they're looking to redistribute some of that housing requirement to more larger cities, urban areas, which means that if that is the case, our housing delivery target, I think, is 736 per annum, which was the previous target, which I think is certainly what the local plan is seeking to try and achieve. But it's all brand new, Councillor Harmer, that's what I'm saying. I'm sure we'll get more information as it comes out from government before Christmas.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Thanks, Kathy. I mean, we're in this zone of not really knowing. That was a stupid figure that the formula generated. However, we are still stuck with another stupid figure, which is the current formula. And it's, there's no embarrassment in saying it. The government is trying to create housing by formulas, and it just does not work. And the fact is that we have given permissions for something like 1,000 properties, 1,000 dwellings that aren't being built, yet we have a housing supply figure which has now fallen below 3 years. The housing trajectory is on the website, and that's a terrible situation. But had the formula that we had previously used been used this time, we would have a housing supply of nearly 4.5 years. So how can you have two so substantially different figures which are meant to represent reality? it's just it's nuts. And hopefully, just through this process, hopefully we might get something which is sensible, which actually reflects what the true demand for housing in this area is. But I think we just have to wait and see on that and really cross the fingers. But I would also say that having had a meeting with some other interested parties, both from other organisations and other parishes, with Hugh Merriman the other day, he is really, he is actually, with a couple of other MPs, got direct access to number 10 and has been talking through this problem. So at least our local MP is very much behind us and understands the issue now, more than I think he's ever done before. So let's hope that he'll have some impact on that as well. On that basis, we'll note that report, and the second last item is appeals. There's the list of appeals. Sam always comes very prepared to answer questions on these appeals, and nobody ever asks him anything. So if you have any questions, please ask. Councillor Coleman.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the Buckholt Lane inquiry and whether we have a date for that yet, or whether there's any prospect of that happening soon.
I think it's January, isn't it, Sam?
It is January, yeah. And now you've bigged me up too much here, Chairman. I don't have the date to hand. Councillor Coleman, I will send you a message with the date of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is definitely January.
It's definitely January, yeah.
Any other questions or comments? No? On that basis, we'll note that report and also note the date for the next site inspections, which is the Tuesday, the 12th of January in next year. And unless anyone has any further questions or comments, I would like everyone just to stay just a couple of minutes to finish the question we were discussing before the meeting. And to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and thank you very much for all the work done by the development management this year on the applications and the whole planning team. So thank you very much, and as we won't meet before Christmas, a Merry Christmas to all. If we could stop the recording, meeting's finished at 11:07, and if everyone could just stay for one